What's happening, y'all? Welcome inside the Fantasy Stock Exchange. Bush coming at you solo today to break down my 5 must starts at the running back position, my 5 must sits at the running back position, and the same for wide receiver. As I do every Saturday, I go over a culmination basically of the start sit videos that I do throughout the week and the DFS articles that I write, and I pick up my top 5 candidates at each kind of designation there. We survived the bipocalypse last week, so we're not digging quite as deep as we were this time last week. I'm basically going to be talking about guys outside the top 20 or so at running back in my rankings, outside the top 30 or so at wide receiver in my rankings. For some of your flex decisions, we'll help you out with those. As always, these are kind of ranked in descending order. So the number 1 candidate would be ranked higher for me than the number 5 candidate, so on and so forth. If you guys enjoy this video at any point, please go down to the bottom of the video, hit the like button. It looks like this. Helps us out, helps us grow, and it takes you 2 seconds. Comment any of your thoughts down below and subscribe to the channel if you are new. We're going to hit the intro and then we're going to get right into this. Okay, so the 5 must starts at running back, you guys should be able to see them on the screen right now. And my number 1 must start at the running back position is a guy that is frustrating a whole lot of people, including myself, up until this week, and it's Antonio Gibson. And to me, he's a must start. I currently have him around RB 18 in my rankings right now. The reason he's a must start for me is, as you guys can see on the screen, this is the first week that Antonio Gibson, since week 3, has logged at least 1 full practice. He full practiced on Friday and isn't questionable heading into the game. And I think this is a big deal because if Antonio Gibson was fully healthy, I firmly believe that Ron Rivera, Scott Turner were ready to give him an uptick in his receiving volume and his work on third down. But because of his injuries, I think that's why J.D. McKissic has such a large role. I don't think it's necessarily because Antonio Gibson hasn't earned that role. I think they're just being cautious with him. They don't want to overwork the guy. 20 opportunities per game, 47% of the routes, and 63% snap share was what Antonio Gibson was seeing in weeks 1 and 2 before he suffered the shin injury. And then he suffered it in week 3. And since then, 16.2 opportunities per game, 33% of the routes, and 50% of the snaps. Now, I've heard a lot of fantasy doctors talk about the shin doesn't heal and things of that nature. It just needs rest. Well, my question is the shin getting better now? Because he is full practicing. He's not questionable heading into the game. And I kind of went into this week, I talked about this on Tuesday, just expecting that he was going to log limited practices all week and he was going to be questionable going into every game going forward. But the fact that he isn't, maybe it is getting a little bit better. Antonio Gibson in this matchup is going to be set up for a pretty positive game script. The Washington football team has played some good teams, the Packers and Chiefs, the last 2 weeks, and they've been in bad game scripts. The Broncos are a little bit more on their level, so I don't think they're going to run away with that one necessarily. They're probably going to be in a bit more of a closer game script. I think Antonio Gibson is set to actually have a pretty good game this week. Don't take him out of your lineup for suboptimal options. If you guys have, Kenneth Gainwell's and Devontae Booker's and Damian Harris's, just put Antonio Gibson ahead of these guys. I have full confidence in him this week, especially with the news that he looks like he's getting a little healthier. So number 2 must start running back on the list is Chuba Hubbard. Chuba Hubbard's role is still intact. He's carrying about 80% of the rushing attempts for the Carolina Panthers offense and running a 40% route tree or so. The only thing weighing down his ceiling is really Sam Darnold and the passing offense and the Panthers offense in general. Atlanta's 30th in pass defense DVOA and 28th in rush defense DVOA. So the Panthers should be able to move the ball with ease on offense, assuming Sam Darnold isn't completely broken. So I like Chuba Hubbard this week to get on track, get back into the end zone probably as well. Number 3 must start running back is Kenneth Gainwell. Kenneth Gainwell is going to see the most important work in this backfield. We don't want the grinder of this backfield. We don't want the guy that is going to be involved on early downs. We want the third down guy. We want the pass catcher because Kenneth Gainwell is in an offense that passes the ball at one of the highest rates in neutral game scripts in the NFL. And as you guys can see on the screen, Kenneth Gainwell and Boston Scott's utilization after Miles Sanders went out, 57% of the snaps for Kenneth Gainwell, 42% of the carries. So Boston Scott did out carry him. But like I said, we care about the routes. We care about the third down work with this team. 61% of the routes and a 27% target share and all the 2-minute drill snaps and the long down and distance was what we saw out of Kenneth Gainwell. So that's exactly what we want to see out of him because he is the guy that is going to be more valuable. And in this matchup, the Lions are giving up the second most adjusted fantasy points to the running back position. So I have full confidence in Kenneth Gainwell this week. I currently have him at RB 22 right now. He's just behind some of the guys that I just talked about before him. And he's a guy that I think you should be able to start as a top 24 running back. Number 4 on this list is Devontae Booker. Devontae Booker's in kind of a similar situation as Hubbard. He's getting all the valuable work, as you guys can see on the screen, but he's played the Panthers last week, which are first in adjusted fantasy points allowed to the running back position. They are one of the best defenses in the league at stopping the run. And they played the Rams 2 weeks ago in a blowout loss where Devontae Booker was basically game scripted out of the game. This week they play the Chiefs, so the blowout loss thing could happen again, but the Chiefs aren't playing nearly as good of football as the Rams right now. So I trust this to be a little more of a closer game, and we know that Devontae Booker is involved in the passing game as well. Now, number 5 on this list is a bit more of a reach. It's a bit more of a, a deeper play. I try and do that with my number 5 on each set of my list. We finally have some clarity in this Texans backfield. David Johnson is a guy that I think you can start this week as a top 30 running back. With Mark Ingram now traded to the New Orleans Saints, if you guys missed that, we're expecting David Johnson to basically return to a similar role of what we saw from David Johnson last year. This year so far, Mark Ingram has averaged 16.8 touches per game, and Phillip Lindsay has yet to surpass 9 touches, with David Johnson kind of fitting in the middle of those two guys. And David Johnson recorded a season high in touches last week, and then Mark Ingram was traded, and he vacates, like I said, nearly 17 touches per game. Johnson had already been running the most routes on the team with 47% of the routes this season. Ingram being gone likely props David Johnson up to a 60-70% route participation running back, and he's probably going to get about half the carries, if not more, as well. So in my opinion, it's a wait and see approach. Ideally, you'd like to see them use him and use Phillip Lindsay for a week so you can determine who's the more valuable piece in the backfield. But I do think you can start this guy this week as RB29. Currently in my rankings, they have a pretty decent matchup. I don't expect the Rams to completely blow out the Texans. The Texans have actually played everybody pretty close. And even if the Rams do blow out the Texans, David Johnson is the pass-catching running back. He's going to be out running routes and catching passes if that's the case. So moving on to the sits, the top 5 sits at the running back position. The number 1 sit that I have is any Seahawks running back, and specifically Alex Collins. He's a sit until further notice, in my opinion. We could have basically seen the dreaded 3-back committee forming in Seattle with Rashad Penny coming back from injury. Him, Alex Collins, and Travis Homer basically split snaps all the way across the board. They were splitting carries. Travis Homer was heavily involved on 3rd down and in long down and distance in the 2-minute drill. Alex Collins basically is a 2-down grinder for a Geno Smith-led offense who's going to get a touchdown here and there, but is not a guy that you can consistently bank on getting into the end zone. So Alex Collins' ceiling on a weekly basis is like 14 for 60 yards and a touchdown. And I think it's far more likely that you're going to get a 5-6 point outing out of Alex Collins now that Rashad Penny is in the fold. And I think Rashad Penny is the better running back, and they're eventually going to seed work from Alex Collins to Rashad Penny continuously. So number 2 on this list is Michael Carter, a sit at running back for me this week. He's currently my RB32 in my rankings. I think he is playable given the fact that his role has seen an increase since the bye week. He's kind of been a beneficiary of the post-bye rookie bump that we've talked about in the past, but I have concerns in this matchup against a top 5 rush defense DVOA. The Bengals have been very good against the run. And of course, he has Mike White at quarterback. Zach Wilson isn't playing in this game, going to be out for a couple of weeks. So he'll need receiving work, which he saw last week, to be fantasy relevant again. I don't think we can 100% count on it because he is still splitting some routes with Ty Johnson. So Michael Carter, just a guy that's a little too risky for me to play inside my top 30, but I do think if you're desperate, you could play him. Mike Davis, the 3rd guy on this list. Cordero Patterson is basically taking over this backfield. He just played a season high 73% of the snaps, and Mike Davis is only getting the non-valuable, non-fantasy relevant work in this backfield. He's getting the 1st and 10 carries. He's getting the 3rd and 2s and the 2nd and 1s. Like, we don't care about those kind of, that kind of volume in fantasy football. It's the reason why DeAndre Swift is so valuable in fantasy, because they just seed that work to Jamal Williams. Mike Davis is basically the Jamal Williams of the Falcons offense. And he's not a guy that I think is overly exciting, because we want the guy that's getting the pass catching work, the goal line work, the big play upside, and that's Cordero Patterson. So Mike Davis is not a guy that I'm interested in starting this week. Boston Scott, who I already touched on, is going to be involved in this game, and it's a good matchup against the Lions, as I talked about, but his floor is extremely low in my opinion, because even though we saw Boston Scott be involved on the goal line last week, we don't really know whether they're going to use Gainwell in that role or whether they're going to use Boston Scott in that role, because we haven't seen it yet. So he wasn't involved in the passing game to the extent that Kenny Gainwell was. So I'm going to roll with Kenny Gainwell and let Boston Scott sit on my bench. I'm assuming not many of you guys were thinking of starting Boston Scott anyways, but if you were tempted because of the good matchup and maybe the uncertainty of this backfield, don't be. I think Boston Scott's a guy that you can stash maybe, but not a guy that I'm overly excited about. Now, the 5th guy on this list should become pretty obvious. Obviously, if Nick Chubb is playing, Dearness Johnson is probably a guy that you can drop even, but he's definitely not a guy that you want to be starting. Don't talk yourself into the fact that he may have earned a bigger role with how he played on Thursday night. Nick Chubb is the dude in this backfield. They're not even going to give Dearness Johnson, Kareem Hunt's week. I think he is a guy that you could stash if you have room, but he's more likely a drop candidate. So moving from the running back position to the wide receiver position, we're going to start with Chase Claypool, who is my number one start at the wide receiver position this week. Chase Claypool ran a career high in routes, nearly 90% of the routes last week or 2 weeks ago before the bye week with Juju out. Deontay Johnson is currently matched up with Denzel Ward as his primary defender. So Chase Claypool does have the best matchup on the field against Greg Newsome, the rookie corner. So I have a feeling that Chase Claypool is going to have a big game in this one. A lot of the steam in this game per Vegas is on the over of this matchup. So I could see this game being sneakily high scoring and Chase Claypool being a big beneficiary of that. Number 2, Devontae Smith. He's currently facing the worst defense in EPA per pass play in the Detroit Lions, one of the league's most pass-heavy offenses, who I've already kind of talked about throughout this video, and they just lost their starting running back. So I'd imagine Devontae Smith could be in for his highest target total that he's seen so far this season. And like I said, the Lions, not good against the pass, one of the bottom 5 units in pass defense DVOA. Devontae Smith has been consistently the number 1 receiver for this team all throughout the season, running the most routes, over a 20% target share, so on and so forth. So he is a guy that I'm absolutely willing to start this week. His former teammate, Jerry Jeudy, is the number 3 start on this list. Jerry Jeudy is coming back from injury, and he gets an immediate cupcake matchup. Washington is allowing the most adjusted fantasy points to wide receivers. He may be limited in routes coming off of a 6-week absence, but Jeudy is still the Jenga piece of this offense, and I've kind of talked about this before, but he's the guy that moves the chains. He's the target hog. We saw him get 7 targets in the first game of the season before he went out with a high ankle sprain. I think Jerry Jeudy's probably only going to run 60, 70, 80% of the routes in this game, but he's probably going to have 8, 9, 10 targets. And against a matchup like this, he's absolutely a guy that I think is going to hit value in DFS. And he's absolutely a guy I'd be willing to start in season long as a top 35 wide receiver as well. Jarvis Landry saw 8 targets in his return last week on only 56% of the snaps and 61% of the routes. So it sounds like Baker Mayfield's going to be back for this game. And Jarvis Landry has consistently been the guy over Odell Beckham Jr. for Baker Mayfield. They clearly have a better connection together. And Jarvis Landry's been a guy that's carved out a pretty decent target share, even in the limited capacity we've seen so far this season. Cole Beasley, the final must-start wide receiver, to me is my favorite DFS play this week to get some exposure to this Bills offense. With no more Dawson Knox in the offense 2 weeks ago before the bye week, Beasley jumped from sub 50% of the snaps and routes to over 90% of the snaps and routes in week 6 before the bye, with Dawson Knox out with a hand injury. So I currently have Cole Beasley at wide receiver 40 this week. If you need somebody to throw into your flex, I really like Beasley this week. And like I said, I think he's a phenomenal DFS play if you guys are going to be playing DFS this week. So moving from the starts to the sits, my must-sit wide receivers, number 1 is the Bears wide receivers, Darnell Mooney and Allen Robinson. In a blowout loss from the Tampa Bay Buccaneers last week, the Bears were playing from behind the entire game, and Nagy and the Bears still opted to only throw 32 times. So this game has the lowest over-under on the slate. It's under 40 points. I'm expecting a slugfest, low-scoring game, running the ball, probably over by 3:45 Eastern time, because neither of these teams are very good at throwing the ball, and both teams like to run the ball quite a bit. So I'm not expecting high target totals for Allen Robinson. I'm not expecting high target totals for Darnell Mooney, and I don't really care that Matt Nagy's going to miss this game. I don't think it's going to change their philosophy a whole lot. So the Bears wide receivers, you got to sit them until further notice, until they actually do something, or until they show some higher signs of passing the ball. Robbie Anderson, the king of unrealized air yards. I currently have him at wide receiver 42 this week. So he is usable this week because the Falcons defense is not very good. It's ranking bottom of the league in both run and pass, as I talked about for Chuba Hubbard. Sam Darnold and him just don't have a connection, which is weird because they already played together in New York. And even in an easy matchup, I just can't trust Robbie Anderson. He's simply too risky. Not a guy that I'm willing to start unless I'm absolutely desperate. Odell Beckham Jr., same thing. He's not healthy, nor is he involved in the offense. Odell Beckham only has 2 games of over 2 receptions this year. He has 2 games with 5 receptions and 3 games with 2 receptions. I got to see it first before I put this guy into my lineup. He's simply not involved in the offense, and he leaves pretty much every single game with a nagging injury, whether it's his shoulder, his ankle, ACL, whatever the case is. Odell Beckham, just not a guy that I'm willing to start. Number 4 on this list is Tyler Boyd, who's basically been completely reduced to Juju Smith-Schuster at this point. His last 3 stat lines since T. Higgins has come back are 4 catches for 24 yards, 1 catch for 7 yards, and 4 catches for 39 yards. It's basically the lowest upside play that you can make at wide receiver. With T. Higgins commanding the amount of targets he's commanding, with Jamar Chase being Jamar Chase, there's simply not enough room and not enough passing volume in this offense for Tyler Boyd. And even though the Bengals have been passing a lot more, as I've talked about throughout the week, Tyler Boyd simply isn't a valuable enough piece of this offense. He doesn't get valuable targets. All he does really is move the chains. He doesn't get red zone targets or deep targets or anything that we care about for fantasy. So he's a guy that I think you can sit until further notice. And then finally, the Saints wide receivers. Maybe you guys are tempted to play some of these guys against the Bucs because they have been very bad against the pass, but the over is getting a lot of steam in this game, and Jameis Winston is in a revenge game, but I can't trust Marquez Callaway. I can't trust Traquan Smith, and because these guys simply aren't getting the passing volume that would lend itself to a safe volume play in fantasy. Maybe one of these guys catches a bomb and they have like a 2 for 72 and 1 touchdown stat line, but that's very, hard to believe that that's going to happen. I'd imagine most of the passing production from the Saints offense is going to be spread out evenly or cycled right through Alvin Kamara, because that's basically how the Saints offense works. I know Jameis Winston's going to be motivated to beat his old team, but I think the Bucs are going to be able to put the clamps a bit on the Saints this week. So if you guys did enjoy this video, again, leave a like down below, comment any of your thoughts down below. Who are you starting? Who are you sitting? Any questions that you have, we will get to them. Subscribe to the channel if you are new as well. And make sure that you check out Underdog Fantasy if you want access to our weekly rankings, our dynasty rankings, our rest of season rankings. Underdog Fantasy is running a new promotion right now where new users can sign up and deposit. And using our promo code FSE, you'll get a 100% match back. So if you deposit $30, you'll get $60 on the site to play with. You'll also get our rest of season rankings, dynasty rankings, and weekly rankings for free for doing that. Or you can go to the website and buy them outright for $20 or become a Patreon, patreon.com/fantasy stock exchange. Peace out, guys. I'll talk to you soon.